Apache twin girls invited the rancher home. He didn't know they planned to marry him to their mom. John Porter was a man who loved his solitude. Living alone on a ranch miles away from town, he found peace in the long hours of hard work. The ranch was everything to him: the cattle, the land, and the quiet. For years, John had avoided social events, preferring to spend his days tending to the ranch, fixing fences, and caring for his animals. He'd never been one for city life or for company, even though he knew people in the nearby town. The town wasn't far, just a short ride by horseback. But it was the people in town that John had learned to keep his distance from. People were complicated, and they often brought trouble. At least that was how John saw it. He had a few friends, but none that he would call close. And when it came to family, he had none left. His father had passed away years ago, and his mother had died when he was just a boy. So John had learned to rely on himself and nothing else. One afternoon, while he was working near the corral, John noticed something strange in the distance. At first, he thought it was a dust storm brewing on the horizon, but as the shape grew closer, he saw that it was a rider, and the rider was coming toward him. John set down his tools and wiped the sweat from his brow. The rider came closer, and John recognized her immediately. It was Elena Two Feathers, one of the twin daughters of the Apache family that lived on the nearby reservation. John had heard of the Two Feathers family. They were well known in the community, respected by both the Apache and non-Apache people. Elena was one of the twin sisters who were often seen helping around town. People spoke highly of her and her sister Maria. They were known for being kind, hard-working, and quick to help those in need. They were also known for being strong, smart, and incredibly independent. John had seen them from a distance during his rare trips to town, but had never spoken to them directly. He wasn't sure why, but something about them intrigued him. Elena dismounted from her horse and approached John with a friendly smile. She was dressed simply, in a pair of worn jeans and a plain shirt, but there was something about her that made her stand out. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, with a quiet confidence, or maybe it was the way the sun caught her dark hair. Either way, John found himself staring for a moment before he snapped out of it. "Good afternoon, Mr. Porter," she greeted him, her voice clear and warm. "Afternoon, Elena," John said, tipping his hat. "I've got something for you," she said, handing him a folded piece of paper. John took the paper, surprised by the gesture. He wasn't used to receiving letters, especially not from people he barely knew. "This is from my family," she explained. "Our mother, Rita Two Feathers, would like to invite you over for a meal. We've heard about all the hard work you've been doing on the ranch, and she thought it would be nice for us to get to know each other better." John blinked, taken aback by the invitation. He didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't every day that someone invited him to their home. He looked at the paper in his hand, unsure how to respond. Well, that's kind of you, Elena," John said, clearing his throat. "But I don't usually socialize much. I've got a lot of work to do around here." Elena smiled, as though she expected this answer. "We understand, Mr. Porter," she said. "But it's just a simple meal. A chance to sit and talk for a little while. We won't keep you long." John hesitated. He had spent so many years alone that the thought of spending time with anyone, especially a whole family, felt strange. But he also knew that the Two Feathers family had a reputation for being kind-hearted and respectful. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. And if he was being honest with himself, he did feel a little curious about them. "Well, I suppose I could spare an hour or two," John finally said. "When would you like me to come by?" Elena beamed, clearly pleased. "Tomorrow evening would be perfect, around sunset, if that works for you." John nodded. "I'll be there." The next evening, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, John saddled his horse and made his way toward the Two Feathers' home. It wasn't far, but as he rode through the open plains, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. His usual ride felt off, almost like he was heading into unfamiliar territory. The ranch was his domain, and he knew it well. But this was something new, and his gut told him that things might not be as simple as they seemed. As he approached the house, he noticed how calm and peaceful the area was. The ranch had a simplicity to it, a sense of peace that John could appreciate. It wasn't as grand or as refined as some of the places he'd seen in town, but it had a warmth to it that was immediately welcoming. The house was a modest single-story cabin with a small garden in the front and a few animals roaming around. There was a fire pit just outside with a few chairs set up around it. John tied his horse to a nearby post and walked up to the door. Elena greeted him with a smile and ushered him inside. The smell of food filled the air, and John could tell that he was about to have a hearty meal. "Come in, Mr. Rosenak." "Porter." "Our mother is expecting you," Elena said, leading him inside. The interior was warm and inviting. The walls were decorated with handmade tapestries, and the light from the fireplace flickered in the room, casting soft shadows across the wooden beams. It felt like a home, a place where people shared more than just space. They shared stories, memories, and moments. Elena's twin sister Maria was sitting at the table, setting out plates of food. She looked up when John entered and gave him a friendly smile. "Glad you could join us, Mr. Porter," she said in a soft voice. Rita, their mother, was standing near the fire stirring a pot. When she turned to greet John, he was struck by her calm and graceful presence. She had a quiet beauty about her, with long, dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Despite the years of hard work she must have endured, there was a kind of peaceful strength in her that made John feel immediately at ease. "Mr. Porter, welcome," Rita said, her voice smooth and warm. "Please, make yourself comfortable. Dinner is almost ready." John took a seat at the table, feeling a bit out of place but trying not to show it. The twins brought the food over, and soon they were all sitting around the table enjoying a meal together. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily. They spoke about the ranching life, the land, and the challenges of living in the West. John found himself intrigued by their stories. The Two Feathers family had lived a hard life, but they had also found a way to live in harmony with the land, respecting it and using it to sustain their way of life. For the first time in a long time, John felt like he was part of something. He had spent years working alone, not trusting anyone enough to let them in. But tonight, surrounded by the warmth of the Two Feathers family, he felt something stir in him. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to live this way forever. Maybe there was a different path for him, one that didn't involve endless solitude. As the evening wore on, John found himself growing more comfortable in their company. The two girls were easy to talk to, and Rita had a way of making him feel like he belonged. He couldn't explain it, but there was a sense of peace here that he hadn't realized he was missing. As they finished their meal, the conversation took a more serious turn. Elena and Maria exchanged a look, and then, with a suddenness that caught John off guard, they made a statement that would change the course of his life forever. But that, as they say, is a story for another time. As the evening wore on, the sounds of the fire crackling and the soft murmur of conversation made the home feel even more inviting. John Porter had always been a man who preferred silence, the kind of peace that only the open land could offer. But tonight, surrounded by the warmth of the Two Feathers family, he felt an unexpected sense of comfort. It was strange, yet not unpleasant. In all his years of living alone on his ranch, he had never experienced anything quite like this. The dinner table was simple, yet the meal they shared felt special. There was roasted venison, vegetables from the garden, and fresh bread that had been baked earlier in the day. John had to admit it was one of the best meals he had eaten in a long time. It wasn't just the food, though. It was the hospitality. It was clear to him that the Two Feathers family put great care into their home and into their guests. Their kindness was sincere, and it made him feel more at ease than he ever thought he would. The twins, Elena and Maria, were lively in their conversation, speaking of the ranching life and their experiences growing up on the reservation. Elena, the older of the two by just a few minutes, spoke about her childhood with a sense of pride. She described the beauty of the land around them, the sweeping hills, the river that ran through the valley, and the wild horses that roamed freely on the plains. Maria, quieter but equally sharp, chimed in with tales of the animals they had raised and the work they had done to keep their homestead running. John found himself listening intently. He had never really known much about Apache life except for what he had heard in town. He was aware that the Apache had a history of struggle, that they had fought for their land and their way of life, but he had never taken the time to learn about their culture. their traditions, or their values. Sitting at that table hearing their stories, he realized how much he had missed by keeping to himself. Rita, their mother, sat quietly at the head of the table. She had a calm, composed presence that seemed to hold everything together. She didn't speak much during the meal, but when she did, her words carried weight. It was clear that she had seen much in her life, tragedy, hardship, and yet still, she carried herself with a quiet grace. John couldn't help but admire her strength. There was something about her that made him feel both comforted and humbled at the same time. When the meal was finished, the family invited him to stay for a while longer. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the night sky had turned a deep shade of blue. The stars were bright, shining through the clear, crisp air. John stood up to help clear the table, but Rita stopped him with a gentle gesture. "No need for that, Mr. Shep." "Porter," she said softly, "please, relax. We'll take care of it. You've had a long ride, and you've helped us enough for one evening." John nodded, feeling slightly awkward but grateful for the kindness. He had never been one to sit idly, but he also didn't want to impose. So he sat back down, his mind racing with thoughts he hadn't expected. He had come to this home expecting nothing more than a meal, but now he was part of something much larger. A family, a history, a culture that was foreign to him but somehow felt familiar. The twins led him outside to the fire pit, where the fire was now a warm glow against the night sky. The cool night air brushed against John's face, and he felt a sense of peace that was hard to explain. He hadn't realized how much he needed something like this, something to remind him of the simple joys in life. Elena handed him a cup of coffee, the strong, rich aroma filling his senses. He took a sip and leaned back in his chair, looking up at the stars. Maria sat next to him, her quiet presence offering a comforting contrast to her sister's lively energy. "It's beautiful here," John said, breaking the silence. Maria smiled, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight.
"Yes, it is," she said simply.
"It's the land. It gives us peace." Elena joined in, her voice filled with a kind of enthusiasm that came naturally to her. "Our people have always known the value of peace, Mr. Porter. The land, the animals, the sky. It all has a rhythm. And we are part of it." John nodded, intrigued by the way Elena spoke. It was as if she had a deep understanding of the world, a connection to something greater than herself. It wasn't something he had ever really thought about before, but as he sat there under the stars, he felt a sense of awe. There was something timeless about the way the Two Feathers family lived, something that seemed to flow naturally with the land and the rhythms of nature. The fire crackled as the three of them sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. John felt his guard slowly come down. The tension he had carried with him all day, the unease of entering a world so different from his own, seemed to melt away. There was no pressure here, no expectations, just the simple comfort of being in the company of people who genuinely cared. It was a rare feeling, one that John hadn't known he had been missing. After a while, Rita joined them by the fire. She sat down gracefully, her presence as calm and steady as ever. She didn't speak at first, simply gazing into the fire. But there was something about her that made John want to open up, to share the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind. "I've spent a lot of years on my own," John said, his voice quieter than usual. "I didn't think I needed much else, but tonight has been different. I've never been around a family like yours." Rita looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's good for people to come together, Mr. Porter," she said gently. "We may live differently, but in the end, we all need something from each other. Our strength is in our community." John wasn't sure why, but her words struck a chord with him. He had spent so many years believing that he could do everything on his own, that he didn't need anyone else. But sitting here now with the firelight dancing in the shadows and the sound of the wind rustling the trees, he realized how lonely he had been all those years. "You're right," he said slowly. "I've been working alone for so long. It's easy to forget what it's like to be part of something."
Elena smiled at him, her eyes warm and knowing. "Sometimes, Mr. Hugh,"
Porter, it's the things we don't realize we're missing that make the biggest difference. The words hung in the air for a moment before the sound of hooves approaching interrupted the quiet night. John turned to see a rider approaching from the distance. As the rider got closer, John recognized him as one of the men from town, Will Harris, a local rancher who often helped out with cattle auctions. Elena, Maria. Rita, Will called out, waving as he neared the campfire. Didn't expect to see all of you out here tonight. What brings you here this evening? I was just passing through and thought I'd stop by to say hello, Will replied, dismounting his horse and walking toward the fire. He greeted John with a nod. Didn't expect to see you here, Porter. I was just enjoying a meal with the family, John said, his voice still carrying the surprise of the evening. Seems I've been invited for a bit more than just dinner. Will raised an eyebrow, clearly amused.
I see. Well, you're in good company.
The two Feathers are good people. As Will sat down by the fire, the group fell into easy conversation once again. And though John didn't know it yet, this night, and the relationships that had begun to form, would change the course of his life in ways he couldn't yet understand. The stars continued to shine brightly above them, casting their soft glow over the land, and for the first time in a long while, John felt as though he might just belong somewhere, with these people, in this place. The firelight flickered and danced, casting long shadows around the campfire where John, Elena, Maria, and Rita sat together. The evening air was cool, but the warmth of the fire and the company made it feel like the world had slowed down, becoming peaceful and comfortable. The quiet moments stretched, and for the first time in a long time, John found himself feeling a sense of belonging. He had always worked alone, even when he lived in town with his father as a boy. But tonight, the presence of these strangers felt familiar, like he was finally in a place where he could take a breath and let down his guard. For the longest time, John had kept himself at a distance from others. He had built his life around work, not relationships. His ranch was his world, and everything else seemed like a distraction. But in this moment, sitting beside the Two Feathers family, he was beginning to wonder if he had missed something important along the way. Perhaps, for all his independence, he had overlooked the power of community, the warmth of a home filled with people who cared. As the evening wore on, the conversation shifted. Elena and Maria began to speak more seriously, their usual light-hearted banter replaced by a quiet tension that caught John's attention. Rita, too, had become quieter, her gaze thoughtful. It was as if something important was about to be said, and John could feel the shift in the air. It was subtle, but it was there, and it made him uneasy. "Elena," Rita said after a long silence, her voice calm but with an underlying intensity. "Why don't you tell Mr. Porter why we invited him here tonight?" John looked at Rita, his curiosity piqued. He had thought that the invitation had been simply to share a meal, but now he realized there was more to it. Elena, who had always been the more outspoken of the two sisters, glanced at her mother before turning to John. "We didn't invite you here just for a meal, Mr. Porter," Elena said, her tone serious. "We invited you because we think you could help our family." John's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "Help? I'm not sure I understand," he said slowly. Maria, who had been quiet up until now, looked at John with those deep, wise eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "Our mother Rita is in need of a partner," she said softly, as if choosing her words carefully. "It's been hard for her, being on her own after our father passed away." John's heart skipped a beat. He had heard about the tragedy that had struck the Two Feathers family, but he had never really asked about the details. He had always kept his distance, assuming it was none of his business. But now, as the weight of their words sank in, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of compassion for Rita and her daughters. "We've been thinking about this for a long time," Elena continued. "Our mother has worked hard to keep this ranch going, but it's been difficult. She needs someone who can help her, someone who can work alongside her, not just in the fields, but in life, someone who understands the land the way she does." John sat back in his chair, processing what they were saying. He had never been good at reading people, at picking up on the subtle cues others might catch, but this felt different. It wasn't just a simple request for help. There was something deeper, something personal in the way Elena and Maria spoke. They weren't just concerned about the ranch. They were concerned about their mother's happiness, her well-being.
Rita spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. I don't need someone to take care of me, Mr. Frey.
Porter, she said, looking directly at him. I've lived a full life, and I've managed this ranch alone before. But I've also learned that there are times when we all need someone.
I believe you could be that person. John's mind raced.
He had spent so many years focusing on his work, on surviving day by day, that he had never allowed himself to think about the bigger picture. A partner? A family? It was a foreign concept to him, one that he had pushed aside long ago. Yet, as he sat there, listening to Rita's calm words, he couldn't deny the possibility that they were offering him something more than just work. It was a chance to be part of something bigger than himself. I'm not sure I understand, John said, his voice quiet but full of uncertainty. You're asking me to help with the ranch, but you're also asking me to be something more?
Elena nodded.
Yes, we believe you could be a good match for our mother.
Not just as someone to work with, but as someone to share her life with.
John's mind spun with the weight of their words.
He had spent years avoiding any kind of relationship, had kept his heart locked away, believing that he didn't need anyone. But sitting here now, surrounded by the Two Feathers family, he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong all along.
I don't know if I'm the right man for this, John said, his voice rough.
I've lived a life on my own. I've kept to myself. I'm not sure I know how to be part of a family like yours. Maria gave him a small, understanding smile. It's not about being perfect, Mr. Dapagasted. Porter, she said. It's about finding a way to make it work. Our mother deserves someone who understands the land, who can respect our traditions, and who can work alongside her, not just for the ranch, but for something deeper. We think you could be that person. The fire crackled softly in the background as John sat in silence, his thoughts swirling. He had never considered the idea of marriage, not seriously, at least. He had always assumed that his life would be solitary, that he would spend his days working the land, alone, but content. But now, as he looked at the Two Feathers family, at the kindness in their eyes, the strength in their voices, he felt the stirrings of something he hadn't felt in years, the desire to belong, to be part of something more than just his own existence. I'm not sure what to say, John admitted, his voice quiet. This is all new to me. Elena's eyes softened. You don't have to decide right away, Mr. Porter.
We just wanted you to know how we feel.
And we wanted to give you the opportunity to think about it.
Rita nodded.
Take your time, she said gently. But know that the offer is there, if you decide that this is something you want. John sat back in his chair, the weight of their words pressing down on him. He had come to this home expecting nothing more than a meal and a friendly conversation. But now he found himself facing a life-changing proposition, a chance to be part of a family, to share in the work, the challenges, and perhaps even the love that had been absent from his life for so long. The night stretched on, and the fire slowly burned low. The soft rustling of the trees and the wind was the only sound that accompanied the silence. John didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't sure he would ever fully understand what it meant to be part of a family like the Two Feathers. But one thing was certain. He would never forget this night. He would never forget the warmth, the kindness, and the proposition that had been laid before him. As the fire flickered out, John looked up at the stars, feeling both uncertain and hopeful, his heart open to the possibility of a new beginning. The following day, John woke up early, as was his habit. The sun had just begun to rise over the hills, casting a soft golden light across the land. He walked out of the cabin and stood for a moment taking in the view. The stillness of the morning, the cool air, and the sounds of the birds waking up around him. It was the kind of peace he had always sought. But today was different. The conversation from the night before was still fresh in his mind, and no matter how hard he tried to focus on the tasks at hand, he couldn't shake the weight of the decision that lay before him. John had always been a man who believed in independence. He had spent years on his own, building up his ranch and keeping to himself. He had never thought about what it would be like to share his life with someone else. He had grown used to the quiet, the solitude, and the rhythm of his work. Now, though, after his conversation with the Two Feathers family, everything seemed uncertain. He walked to the barn feeding the horses and checking on the cattle, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Rita and her daughters. They had been kind, welcoming, and full of warmth. They had offered him a chance to be part of something, a family, a community, that he had never considered before. But was it the right thing to do? John wasn't sure. He didn't know how to be part of a family, how to be a partner to someone. He had spent so many years on his own that the idea of changing that was almost terrifying. What if he couldn't live up to their expectations? What if he wasn't the man they thought he could be? As he worked, the hours seemed to drag on. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and by midday, John had made no real progress in making a decision. He needed time, but time was something that was running out. The longer he put it off, the more he felt the pressure to decide. He knew the Two Feathers family was waiting for him to come to a conclusion, but the thought of making a commitment this big was overwhelming. By afternoon, John found himself riding toward the Two Feathers ranch again. He wasn't sure why he was going, but something inside him told him he needed to talk to Rita again, to understand what they were really offering him. As he approached the house, he could see Elena and Maria working outside, moving hay bales and tending to the animals. They waved to him as he rode up, their faces bright and friendly. Mr.
Porter! Elena called out, her voice full of warmth. Glad to see you again!
Come on in, Rita's expecting you. John dismounted and followed Elena into the house. The familiar sense of food and wood smoke filled the air, and for a moment John felt a sense of comfort, even though he was still unsure of what to say. Rita was sitting at the table, her hands resting calmly in her lap. When she saw John, she smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that seemed to tell him she understood his hesitation. "Mr. Porter, it's good to see you," Rita said, her voice soft yet steady. "Please, sit down." John sat across from her, looking at her carefully. There was a quiet strength in Rita's eyes that he admired. She had faced challenges in her life, and yet she carried herself with grace and resilience. She wasn't asking for much, just companionship, someone to share her life with, someone who could work alongside her and support her. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," John began, his voice hesitant. "I've never really thought about being part of something like this. I've spent so many years working alone. I'm not sure if I'm the right person for the job." Rita didn't rush to respond. She sat back, looking at him with patience, giving him the time he needed to gather his thoughts. "You're not alone anymore, Mr. Gulenios." "Porter," Rita said softly, "you don't have to carry everything on your shoulders by yourself. We're offering you a chance to be part of something meaningful. You don't have to make a decision right now. But think about it. What kind of life do you want for yourself?"
John was quiet for a moment, considering her words.
He had always been so focused on his work, his ranch, that he had never really thought about the life he wanted beyond that. He had built his life around the land, but what did he have beyond that? His ranch was his home, but it was also his prison. He had kept people at a distance, avoided relationships, and kept his heart guarded. But now, with Rita's words hanging in the air, he realized how lonely he had been all these years. "I've spent so much time thinking about survival," John said slowly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've never really thought about what it means to live, to truly live. Maybe I've been too afraid to." Rita nodded, her expression understanding. It's never easy to take that first step, but sometimes the hardest thing is to let go of the fear. Life is meant to be shared, Mr. Porter. It's not meant to be lived alone. John looked at her, his thoughts racing. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this kind of change, but deep down he knew that he couldn't keep living the way he had. He needed something more, something beyond the work and the solitude. Maybe it was time to open himself up to the possibility of a future he had never considered. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," John admitted, his voice low. "But I think I'm willing to try." Rita's eyes softened and she smiled warmly. "That's all I ask, Mr. Porter. A chance to try." As they sat there in the quiet of the room, The weight of the decision began to feel less heavy. John wasn't making the choice out of obligation. He wasn't being forced into anything. This was his decision, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was making it for the right reasons. He was choosing to be part of something, choosing to take a chance on a life that was different from the one he had known. The rest of the day passed in a blur. John stayed with the Two Feathers family, helping out around the ranch and talking with them more. The more time he spent with them, the more he began to see the possibilities that lay ahead. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, of course, but there would also be a chance to build something new, something worth having. As the sun began to set, casting a soft glow over the land, John stood outside with the twins, looking out over the horizon. The night air was cool, and the sky was painted in shades of pink and orange. It was a beautiful sight, and for the first time John felt like he was truly seeing it, not through the lens of work or survival, but through the lens of hope.
"I've made my decision," John said quietly, turning to face Elena and Maria. "I'm willing to try."
"I'm willing to be a part of this, a part of your family." Elena smiled brightly and Maria nodded in approval. "You won't regret it," Elena said, her voice full of excitement.
We're glad to have you, Mr. Porter.
John smiled back, a sense of relief washing over him. It wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready. Ready to take that first step into something new. Something that could change the course of his life forever. As the days passed, the decision John had made began to sink in. It wasn't a quick decision, nor was it an easy one. But as he worked side by side with Rita, Elena, and Maria, something in him started to change. He wasn't just working the land anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that felt real in a way he hadn't experienced before. The quiet loneliness he had lived with for so many years began to fade, replaced by the presence of a family. One that welcomed him and accepted him, flaws and all. John's days on the ranch became busier, filled with tasks that he never thought he'd share with anyone. He was used to doing everything himself. The cattle, the crops, the repairs. It had all been on his shoulders. But now, there was a team. He worked alongside Elena and Maria, and they worked with him, not as employees or hired hands, but as partners. There was something freeing about it, something about having others to rely on, and to rely on him in return. It wasn't just work, it was a shared life, a shared purpose. Rita had been right. Life was meant to be shared. He had always kept his distance, believing that he didn't need anyone. But now, he could see that he had been wrong. It wasn't just about the physical labor. It was about the connections, the conversations at the dinner table, the laughter around the fire, the small moments of quiet that were no longer lonely. They were shared moments, and that made all the difference. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its soft glow across the ranch, John found himself sitting outside, looking out over the land. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the air had that cool crispness of evening. It was a peaceful sight, but more than that, it was a hopeful one. The future, once uncertain, was now something John was beginning to look forward to. Rita joined him, sitting down beside him with a sigh of contentment. She had been working hard all day, as always, but there was a quiet joy in the way she moved. Her strength was something that John had come to admire deeply. She had faced so much in her life, and yet she carried herself with grace and dignity. And now there was a peace in her, one that came from knowing she wasn't alone anymore. "I've been thinking," John said, breaking the silence, "about everything. The ranch, this family. I never thought I'd be part of something like this." Rita smiled softly, her eyes warm. "You're a part of it now, Mr. Deason. Porter. It's not just about the work.
It's about the people. And you're one of us."
John nodded, the words sinking in. He wasn't just a helper on the ranch. He was a part of the family. It wasn't something he had expected, but it was something he had grown to cherish. "I'm glad," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I never knew how much I needed something like this. Rita's smile widened and she reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of both reassurance and affection. "We're glad too, John. Sometimes it's the things we don't expect that change our lives the most." As the evening settled into night, the two of them sat in companionable silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky. The world felt vast and endless, but in that moment, it also felt small. Small enough for them to share it. Small enough for John to feel like he belonged. The next few weeks were filled with work, but also with laughter, conversation, and the kind of small moments that John had never known he was missing. Dinner was always a gathering at the table, with everyone contributing something, whether it was food or conversation. Sometimes they would share stories of their past, of the challenges they had faced and overcome, and John would listen, amazed at how strong each of them was. Maria, ever the quiet one, had a sharp wit that John had come to appreciate. Elena's energy never seemed to wane, and she was always eager to lend a hand or share a story that made everyone laugh. And Rita, always calm and thoughtful, would offer words of wisdom that seemed to hold the weight of years of experience. Together they made a perfect team. John found himself growing closer to them each day. He was no longer just the outsider. He was part of their rhythm, part of their daily life. The work didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a shared responsibility. And when the sun set each evening and they gathered around the fire to share stories and watch the stars, John felt something inside him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. But it wasn't just the work or the family that had changed. John's connection to the land was different now, too. Before, the land had been his livelihood, a source of income and survival. He had treated it with respect, but it had always been a tool, something he used to make a living. Now, it was more than that. It was home. It was part of the life he was building, part of the future he was beginning to imagine. One afternoon, as John worked alongside Elena in the fields, he paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow. He looked around at the land, the same land he had worked alone for so long, and realized it no longer felt like a place he had to conquer. It felt like a place that was already part of him, a place that was full of life, full of potential. It wasn't just a ranch. It was the foundation of a future he was building with the Two Feathers family. "I never thought I'd be doing this," John said, looking at Elena as she worked beside him. "When I first came here, I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. But now, it feels like it's where I belong."
Elena glanced at him, her smile bright and genuine. "You do belong here, Mr. Porter."
"We're all part of something together now. It's not just the land, it's the people too."
"And you're part of our family." John smiled back, feeling the truth of her words settle in his heart.
He had found something he hadn't known he was looking for. And it wasn't just the work or the ranch, it was the people. It was Rita, Elena, Maria. It was the quiet moments, the shared responsibilities, and the knowledge that he wasn't alone anymore. As the days passed, John continued to grow into his new life. The mornings were filled with work, and the evenings with shared stories and laughter. And through it all, John found himself becoming more and more a part of the Two Feathers family. They had opened their hearts to him, and in return, he had opened his heart to them. One evening, as they sat around the fire, John realized that his life had changed in ways he hadn't expected. He had come to this ranch as a stranger, unsure of his place in the world. But now, he was part of something that was real, something that gave him purpose. And as he looked at the faces of the people who had welcomed him into their lives, he knew that he had made the right choice. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but John no longer feared it. He had found a family. He had found a home. The stars shone brightly above them, and for the first time in a long time, John felt at peace. He was no longer just a man working alone on a ranch. He was part of something much bigger, something that mattered. And for the first time he knew that the future was full of possibilities.